So my presentation is about women in colonial Mexico and how they were affected each by colonial society of the Spaniards. So here in this picture we see a Spaniard with an Indian woman and their mestizo child, and this was not uncommon. According to the textbook, the Spanish, they had Spanish wives and Indian mistresses. This is why you can say that most of Mexico's population by that time, the colonial time, it was, rising to the mestizo level. So, general overview. So, women, yeah, in Mexico, in colonial times, women were affected differently, and that all depended on class, ethnicity, and the time periods. And we can divide those three time periods in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. So, married, unmarried, or widowed women, they each had their own, they were affected differently also. So, in this picture, we see that the different, the diversity of women. We have a slave, we have a mestizo, we have a Creole, and a Spaniard. So, and, each one's dressed differently. So, technically, more like today or, a couple years ago, much like in colonial times, women, they could not hold public office, vote, be judges, anything having to do with a skilled trade or, a high elite position in government. So occupations. So work for women, each one had a differed differently. So according to the 1811 Mexico City census, 13% of Spanish and Creole women held a job. 36 mixed race like mestizos held a job, and 46% of Indian women held a job. So as you can see, the lower the class, the lower the status, the more likely they're gonna need a job, not want a job. And the higher the status, the lower it is they're gonna have a job. So in this picture, we see what women working what is a textile. And so primarily women, they work in domestics. There will be cigarette makers, wet nurses for other women, and washerwomen. Now, interestingly, for the men working the mines, women would serve them as servants, prostitutes, and cooks. For the Creole, the poor Creole, and the mestizos, they worked as seamstresses or, as vendors in stalls, like as you can say, the flea market. And, Indians, they sold what they could produce, like poultry, vegetables, and textiles. And slaves, they worked in sugar mills. So property rights. Anything for women, much like, in some places today, they cannot do things without their husbands unless they are unmarried or widowed. So that means, if they have property, if they have inherit property also, the husband has the right to carry all out the legal proceedings, and except for, married and widowed, which at the time, and much like today, you can say also, they held the most independence compared to married women who were more dependent. So, and obrajes, they were the most elite women because they were either unmarried or widowed and they had property, such as, for example, here they own bakeries, print shops, textile workshops. This in hacienda, some women, they own haciendas also. So for the social roles, so for peasants, so another thing here, during this time period, I think the end of 18th to 19th century, employment started rising for women. Reason being that the Spanish crowns, thought that if women held more occupations, they'll mean that more money would be coming in, and men, they needed men for more mining, farming, and military service. So the occupation started rising for women. But before getting to that century, peasants, technically, women, you can say they were like housewives, what we call today modern day housewives. Peasants, they did, everything else the men didn't do. They took care of the kids, they helped when the harvest season was ready, they did meals, they tended the gardens for the peasants. Now, for those of European ancestry, like the Creoles, honor was very important. So that means that virginity was important. That's, that's the norm. Before virginity, before marriage. After marriage, that's different. And now the dowry for the elite. Dowry was very important for the elite woman because they would attract an elite man and they'll be guaranteed a higher social standing. In this picture, we can see how a peasant woman, she's preparing meal for her child. Now, education. The poor receive nothing. Much like today, money. If you don't have money, you don't have an education. The elite, they did receive minimal education, but only what they thought was required. For example, catechism, like the Catholic Church, anything that was deemed necessary for them. Indians, they did receive no formal education except, what was taught in their family and community. The people that gave education were nuns and laywomen, which was known as amigas. Now, education was given, but not to uplift the female status, instead to assign roles. So, for example, it was to tell them what they could and what they could not do. For example, here in this picture, we see Juana Inés de la Cruz. She was a nun. She was very knowledgeable. She had a lot of writings, a lot of books, and she chose to go to the convent instead of getting married or remaining unmarried because she knew that it guaranteed her more education. And that was a sad reality back then, and even today in some countries when women can go to school. And that was my presentation.